The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. So said FDR on the day of his inauguration in 1933. By the time he took office, the U.S. had already been undergoing almost 4 years of the Great Depression. In that time, banks had crashed, Wall Street had crashed. It was a very scary time, and people were full of fear. Okay, so now we are not currently in a Great Depression, but we are definitely in some unsettled times, and that's produced fear for a lot of people. So in this video, we're going to talk about fear and ways that you can address your own fears and how you can go ahead and gain control over your fears. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin, and I know a little bit about fear. I spent 30 years working in some really dangerous places. I was an investigator doing case preparation investigations for attorneys, and very few times did my work take me to nice neighborhoods. I worked in some pretty scary places, and I had to learn how to address fear so that it didn't prevent me from moving forward. And it's my hope in this video that as we talk about ways that you can move forward, that's exactly what will happen. All right, so when we talk about fear, we have to recognize something. Fear is triggered by something that's almost primordial in us. It's a gut instinct. And as you know, we should never, ever ignore our gut instincts. It's when we rationalize how we're feeling that we get into trouble. So we don't want to do that. We need to examine when we're feeling fearful, what it is that causes us fear. Now there's a caveat to all of that, which is there's things we can control and things that are out of our control. And in truth, if we cannot address something and we have no way to address it, all we can do is work within ourselves, work within our communities, and deal with our fears directly as they relate to us, right? We can't fix those that are beyond our reach. So what I want to talk about here is, first and foremost, you have to listen to that fear. You have to kind of turn it, look at it from all different perspectives, and ask yourself, is this fear based on something real? There's a lot of times where you feel fearful and that passes because that fear is not really based on something that you need to be fearful of. I will never say that fear is not merited. I will just say that there are times that you really don't need to be fearful of something. So the first thing is, when you feel some kind of fear, is to do a gut check and ask yourself, why? What is it specifically that's making me feel fearful? Is it a fear of a person that's walking down the street? Is it a fear of a financial crash? Or is it a fear that you're feeling and you just don't have an explanation for it? So we've got to go ahead and look at that and adjust how we perceive the fear, right? We don't ever dismiss it, but how we perceive that fear is something that is within our power and within our control. So whenever you're feeling this fear, do that gut check and ask yourself, why? Okay, once you do that, what are the contributing factors? Is there something explicit that's triggering your sense of fear? Is it just a kind of a queasy feeling and you're not really sure where it comes from? Because here's the key to fear. It's addressing it directly. It's taking overt action rather than waiting on things to come to us. So for example, when I was an investigator, and I used to work in some pretty bad locations, and my job in fact was to do what I call witness interview cold calls. I literally just showed up at the front door of a total stranger's home, knocked on the door, and tried to get them to be interviewed for my case. Now, I didn't know who was in the house. I didn't know if there were weapons there. I didn't know if the person was a criminal or violent. I didn't know any of that. I just went to the home. Now, I developed skills in order to keep myself safe in that process, and that's one of the things that I actually teach when I work with business owners on personal safety, and also when I work with businesses to help them implement workplace violence. But you can understand that the unknown is primarily what would cause my fear. Now, whether I had fear or not, it didn't matter because that was my job and I had to go and try to do the interview. And look, most of the times I succeeded. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say 97% of the time people were willing to talk to me about something, and it was usually something pretty horrific. I wasn't hired because something good happened. So what you do is, for me, it was, okay, what's causing me the fear? Is it the way that this property looks? Does it look ramshackle? Are there people hanging out around it that look pretty unsavory? You know, if that's the case, then I need to trust that and think to myself, okay, this doesn't seem safe to me. How can I do the interview safely? And no, for those of you thinking, why didn't I just call? That's a much less effective way. You are much more likely to get a witness interview if you just show up at their door. So I had to deal with this sense of fear and assess where was that coming from. Once I did the gut check and I looked at it, I had a couple of choices. I could go and try to just do the witness interview right on the front porch, which I did do on more than one occasion, or I could go into the house. So either way, I had to make that judgment call. Now, when you're dealing with fear, the first thing I like to do is to try to take ownership of how I'm feeling. The best way to do that is 3 deep breaths. Some people like to do box breathing. Other people like to do different types of things. For me, it was in through the nose, out through the mouth, 3 times, which gave me a chance to kind of calm my inner self and to now survey the situation that I was dealing with. So when I did that, that gave me the ability to discern, is this fear something that I really need to focus on, or is this fear something I can tamp down and push back away? Most of the time, I conducted these interviews without any problems. So in general, once I was able to go ahead and tuck that fear away, I was able to move forward. But look, there are times that I dealt with a scary situation and had to address that fear. And it was a fear, again, let's say for my safety. And that was the time that I was walking down Pico Boulevard on the sidewalk, heading to a Winchell's Donut to get coffee, at night. And there was a guy that came off the fence. And as he came off the fence, I saw something metal reflect light from one of the street lights. Now, obviously, that produced a sense of fear, and as a matter of fact, there would be something wrong if it didn't cause, that very human sense of fear. And fear is not something you overcome. It's something that you work with and you put into a specific place so that you can do what you need to do. And in that case, I couldn't turn around. There was way too much traffic going on Pico. And at that time in Santa Monica, there was a huge homeless population. And homeless people themselves live in some pretty dangerous places. Being on the street is pretty dangerous. Some of them had mental health issues. Some of them had time in and out of the jail and the criminal justice system. So I really didn't want to set this person off. But as he came out, his plan was to block my path. So I had to do some quick thinking. And if I let myself become overcome with the fear, I wouldn't have been able to do that quick thinking. And by the way, what I came up with was to not stop by this guy because obviously he was holding something metal in his hand and that wasn't going to be good. So the way he tried to get me to stop was to ask me, what time is it? Now that's a pretty good ploy because most people will look at their watch, they'll go, okay, it's 10 o'clock or whatever time it was. But I knew if I stopped like that, there he was right in front of me, my path would be blocked and he would have whatever was in his hand that was metal, face it, it wasn't going to be good, at his disposal. So when he asked me what time it was, I looked at my watch but kept walking. Then I looked at him and I said, whatever time it was, and then I just walked right past him. I did not stop, and as I got down past him, I saw that he looked pretty dumbfounded, and it was pretty apparent to me that this technique had worked for him. But really what we're talking about here is I didn't have time to be overwhelmed by fear. I had to take action, make decisions, and implement a plan. And to me, that's a really important thing to do when you're dealing with fear. It's to go ahead and take action. It's to implement an approach rather than let it overwhelm you. Now, there are different situations, different scenarios that fear can cause, but the most important thing to me is you need to take action, you need to keep moving forward, you need to keep going, and address that fear in a way that makes sense. Don't misunderstand me here, because absolutely this guy was holding a weapon. It turned out to be a sharpened metal rod, or what they call a shank, and so this was somebody that had been in the criminal justice system at one point in time or another, but that shank could clearly be used to stab me. So having a sense of fear was not misplaced, it was not misguided, it was appropriate, but what was really important here was keeping that fear in perspective and not letting it overwhelm. And that's what I want for you folks. Anytime that you're feeling fear, ask yourself why. Once you understand where that fear is coming from, then I want you to take some form of action, whatever it is that you can, in order to address that fear, or in order to keep moving, or if it's a fear that really you think you can push away for the time being, then push it away. But don't sit there, don't be paralyzed, paralysis through analysis. Take some action, make it productive action if you can, but be aware that being stuck will not help you to address that fear and to work within that fear. You'll notice I don't say overcome that fear, because fear is not something to overcome. It's something to address, it's something to work with, or it's something to be able to put in the right perspective. But it's never something to overcome, and that's because we're genetically programmed for fear. So when you're going through something like that, take those few deep breaths, look at the situation in total. What is causing that fear? In my case, that little flash of metal, that caused fear. That guy moving off the fence to block my path, that caused fear. These were legitimate fear to have, but at the same time, fear can prevent us from taking action. It can prevent us from having a clear mind. It can prevent us from moving forward and addressing a situation. So I had to put that fear into a place that didn't prevent me from taking action. On my website, www.mikecorwin.com, you'll find some upcoming workshops that I have. One is for workplace violence prevention, another is on personal safety for business owners and professionals, and the third is for plaintiff law firms on setting up an effective in-house investigation system. So go ahead and check those out.